Perfect.
It's Macrae, right?
Correct.
Sweet. I knew it. Just wanted to make sure. All right. Well, everyone, welcome back to a very exciting episode of the Storybox podcast. Today, my friends, I'm delighted to welcome Logan Macrae to the Storybox. Now, for those of you that don't know who he is, you're about to see him, or I'm pretty sure many of you would have seen him in the new film, Where the Crawdads Sing. I personally haven't seen it yet, but I promise that I will. It's based off a book by Delia Owens, and it's a story of the coming of age of Kyra Clark, which is actually played by Daisy Edgar-Jones, who finds herself the subject in a surprising tale of possible murder. So if that doesn't pique your interest, it piques mine, but I don't know why I haven't seen it yet. Probably the busyness of my schedule. But anyway, you can also be seen in Apple TV's crime thriller series, Blackbird, starring Taron Egerton, set to premiere, which is already out right now too on Apple TV. And you have just wrapped production in Amazon Prime's The Burial, opposite Tommy Lee Jones and Jamie Foxx. You actually have quite the fashion. You're a fashion icon too, I believe, in the fashion world. You have done brand campaigns for Ralph Lauren and Tommy Hilfiger, among many, many others. And you're transitioning from fashion, I believe, into acting. Logan, man, can I welcome you so much to the Storybox podcast today?
Thank you very much, Jay. I'm happy to be here.
Happy to have you here, man. You are quite a versatile individual. So you're going from fashion to acting, which I don't think is a very easy thing to do. But nonetheless, I'm very keen to actually dive into that in just a moment. But before we do, my very first question for you, man, is what does success look like for you?
Oh, wow. I think I look at success as, I kind of look back at my past self and I make sure that I'm improving in different aspects of my life. I don't think, and especially in the worlds that I work in, the second I start looking at other people, I can get pretty down on myself about certain things very easily. And especially with Instagram and everything else, I think everybody thinks everyone lives a fabulous life. So I know the best way to kind of look at that is just compare it to where I was in past years and whatnot and take it from there.
So dealing with comparison syndrome, I guess, and this is something that I've struggled with for quite some time, and I'm 25, so I'm still really young, but how have you been able to navigate comparison syndrome in your own life?
I think it's just awareness, honestly. You just have to be very, very careful and aware when you're kind of slipping in those cracks and, making assumptions that you don't necessarily know everything about somebody else's life. But it's very easy to, because we all have this facade that's put on for social media and whatnot, that everybody can jump to these conclusions that everything's perfect. So I really just try to be very, very self-aware and not judge or jump to any conclusions without knowing someone.
Yeah, that's a good point to raise, actually. It's the awareness is, I think, the most difficult part of it all, like actually being aware that you are comparing yourself, because in essence, for me as well, when I'm looking at someone on social media, like I kind of get into that trap, like I get down into this wormhole, so to speak. And I guess stopping myself from doing it, like the awareness gets me to stop it, but actually getting to that awareness is tricky. Do you have like any advice at all, like from your experience?
I don't know if there's necessarily like a practice or something that I have in place. I think that I just try to revert back to myself when I kind of catch myself slipping and I feel a little bit down. And I think I revert back to what are those things that I try to do on a daily basis that put me in the right mindset to, kind of accomplish goals and go after things. And, if I'm focusing on those things, I'm not focused so much on what everybody else is doing. I'm focused on what I'm doing.
So focusing on what you're doing right now, which is acting, I wanted to go back a little bit, because what was the career trajectory like? Did you always want to be an actor growing up?
No, it's funny. I did a play, and I don't even know how young I was when I did this play. And I even had a conversation with my parents a little bit about it recently. My parents were like, "Oh yeah, you did do that, didn't you?" Like, it was one of those things that, like, it was so not like on anybody's radar because it was so far like giving a baseball reference, but like in left field a little bit. Like it totally was not what anybody was expecting me to do. And I grew up in a family that was very like sports and, very stereotypical, like small town America type thing. And so the theater and acting and all that stuff wasn't really on my radar. And then a lot of it had to do with, me moving to New York City. And I think once you move to a big city, the things that you're exposed to and, the people that you meet and everything else, you kind of start wondering like, oh, hey, that one track narrow, like, lifestyle isn't exactly the way that everybody's growing up. So I ended up falling into it while I was in New York. Modeling is how I found it.
So tell me about the transition from where you grew up in New Orleans, right?
No, actually, I grew up in Colorado.
Colorado. So you went from Colorado to New Orleans and then from New Orleans to New York. Is that right?
So I actually went Colorado to New York and then New York to New Orleans. So yeah, right now I'm bouncing between New York and New Orleans. So yeah.
So why did you decide to go to New York and not LA?
It was very funny. It was a family thing, really. My father grew up on the East Coast, and I had my grandmother and some other relatives in New Jersey. And so I actually went my first summer in New York, which was basically New Jersey. I lived with my grandmother in New Jersey, and I just took the train in and out of the city whenever I had to. So it was a convenience thing. It was a free place to stay for a summer. And then that summer turned into 12 years in New York. So yeah, I got out of grandma's basement and, moved into the city after a summer. I was like, all right, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this like in New York.
So tell me about how hard was it for you in terms of getting roles? Was it a tricky scenario or did you find it a lot easier than other people?
It's something that I tell everyone. It's so funny when you're to the point where, these things are booking, these things are coming out and all that stuff is everybody somehow forgets that I've been trying to do this for 8-10 years. And like, there was all that stuff that, nothing happened in all those years. So it's something that I actually remind a lot of people of is it's a grind, it really, really is a grind. And it's something I think part of the reason why I think there are a lot of people that are not successful in this is because you are not seeing the results from all of the work that you put into it for such a long, long period of time. And especially in the world we live in now, everyone's looking for some form of like instant gratification that's not what this is. Those stories that, people are being discovered and being in this next big movie and everything else, like the chances that they've done nothing ever and then all of a sudden they're just, a superstar is, I don't think they're completely true, or they're very, very rare circumstances.
Yeah, those ones are few and far between these days. And because so many people are actually wanting to get into the market, it's becoming like really, really competitive. So you got to be this outstanding figure. And those people that are getting quote mega famous, like your Chris Hemsworth or your Chris Pratt, like they also forget that they had to start from the very bottom as well. And they forget like, they often see the top of the iceberg. They don't see what's underneath. Even for those people that quote got found and they're really, really famous or big these days. But what kept you going, man? Like what kept you going during that 10-year period?
Part of it is just, I don't know, craziness. I don't really know what, part of it was like looking back, I'm like, I don't know why I didn't quit. And I think that I still have days that I want to quit. But I think part of it was, I was lucky that I did have income from the modeling source, which, I'm lucky in that instance where some people just don't have that option and they're truly like waiting tables and stuff just to get their shot. But, I was of the camp where I had that coming in. And then, it's another thing too, where it's just always been very, very hard for me to quit things. I don't know what it is. There's something ingrained in me that whether I look at myself as a failure or whatever, but I just don't quit easily for some reason.
Have you always been like that?
There was this instance growing up that I actually did quit a sport, and it was, partially my own doing, partially like the influence of my dad. And I remember my dad sat me down years later and he was like, I regret that. Right. And it was very funny because I regret quitting the sport too, because it was something I really enjoyed, but it was just kind of a bad scenario of like team and coach and stuff like that, that I guess I was kind of shown the idea of quitting at like 13, which is, we don't really catch on to what that does to us. But when you look back on it and you can kind of analyze it throughout the years, you realize like maybe that was a rash decision. And, I think when you're in the moment, especially in the moment of wanting to quit, it's probably because things are not going your way. And, I think if we kind of pull back and kind of go to more of a macro scale, we realize that, hey, it's not as bad as you think it actually is.
How do you view rejection today?
Today I think I look at it as there's going to be another opportunity. No matter what you're doing, the chances that this was your one shot is pretty slim, unless you're trying to like, I don't know, be an astronaut or something. But like, other than that, I think you're going to have another chance to do whatever you're trying to do in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I can relate to, like, for me growing up, I used to start something and then more than likely I'd probably give up if it got too difficult. But now as I'm getting older, I realize the importance of sticking with something. And my grandfather used to say to me, if you do a job, give it your all, be excellent, give you 110% if you can until it actually gets done. Like, don't start something unless you're going to actually finish it. Whereas before I'd start something and just, forget it. But nowadays I'm like, hopefully a little bit more wiser. And then I lean more into rejection these days because I noticed that it actually gets me to where I actually need to be rather than where I want to be. And they're two different things. Where I need to be is actually a lot better for me than when I actually want to be, which is a funny conundrum.
Yeah. And I also think that like, quitting something, it's a muscle too, that I think, once you quit something, it becomes easier to quit something else. And like, it becomes a very slippery slope that you have to be, it goes back to kind of that awareness thing that if you don't watch yourself, you're going to quit everything on some level,
Well, you're not really building that resilience muscle, or you're not really persevering in any such instance. I often look at it like you've got to be persistent to get something that you actually want. And eventually it's going to happen, but you're always going to be exactly where you need to be, but you're chasing something that you want eventually. But persistence is what's going to help you build that resilience muscle. It's going to build that perseverance. I call it my like 5 Ps, right? So persistently practice prayer with patience and perseverance, and you will be okay. That's the ultimate example of life for me. I could be completely wrong.
Very true. It's that consistency thing. I think the more consistent you are, the more you keep trying and everything else. It's, it really is kind of just that, you kind of keep hitting the wall until, eventually the wall breaks, and it will, but it might take 1,000 times, but it's going through the process of those 1,000 times. Yeah. I always look at it as, I take improv classes, and I still take improv classes. And I honestly suggest to anyone across the spectrum, even if you have no interest in acting or anything else, to take an improv class, because it's something that it puts every single person, no matter how good you are, outside of your comfort zone. And you will see the results from an improv class almost immediately. And they're weird results too, because it's a muscle that you're working throughout the process, that you walk out of that class and all of a sudden you're just like quicker about things, and you're firing these neurons and everything that you never have before. That like, I'll be shooting the shit with friends, and like after an improv class, somebody will say something and I am so quick and like witty right back to them after an improv class. But it's just because I worked all those muscles that it's really is a good practice to work through that kind of exercise.
Did you find that, okay, so you being a model to some degree, then transitioning to being an actor, acting in this new film where the Crawdads Sing, and doing all the improv classes, did you find that helped you build that confidence to go in and not be nervous, or were you nervous still?
The nerves are definitely there. And I think the nerves are probably always going to be there. It's just a matter of feeling it. It's a matter of being in that situation before, knowing how that situation is going to go. And I think a lot of actors always speak of like set experience, and like set experience is so vital because it's hard to get. You have to book something to have set experience. And once you have that set experience, you can go on to another set with that experience and build off of it. So, it helps. I think the improv helps. It puts you in kind of awkward situations that you're uncomfortable with, and it teaches you how to work through that. So I think that anything that puts you in a difficult situation that you have to work through is going to help you improve.
So how did you end up getting the role in Where the Crawdads Sing?
So yeah, it was, my agent was just looking out for me. I actually auditioned for a different role in the movie first. Huh. And people don't realize there's so many processes. There's so many things that, just because you don't get a role doesn't mean that you had a bad audition or anything else, because, if I hadn't had a decent enough audition the first time around, they never would have sent the audition for something else. So, there's small wins that kind of accumulate that people don't realize are actually there. So, so the second audition they sent me was for Kaya's brother, Jodie. And looking back at it, I was so not right for what the other role was. And I was so right for who Jodie was as a person that it was kind of the perfect match.
You're going to have to help me. Is Jodie a main character in the film?
So Jodie is the lead. Kaya's brother is who he is. So yeah, he plays a pretty significant role in her life and has a lot to do kind of in a very crucial moment in the film of kind of helping raise her back up. And, him coming back into the film, back into her life is a significant part of the story without, saying too much for anyone that hasn't seen it.
We love spoilers on this show.
Right? Yeah. Who doesn't love a spoiler?
No, I'm just saying that because I love spoilers. My audience might not, so sorry.
No, and I don't think it gives anything away, but it is an important part of the storyline that I think, a lot of people cared about, especially those that, were big fans of the story from the book.
Yeah, it is a pretty popular book. Every time I walk into a local bookstore, it's pretty much on display. And I think the movie helped amplify it. So, I mean, for you, how much you actually in the movie? Like, we're talking nearly every scene or the majority?
No, not nearly every scene. Kaya has love interests in the story who are kind of her, who are the other, the other leads of the film, or her two love interests. And then, I'm one of the other significant supporting cast that is part of her family. And then part of this, like I said, this coming together thing at the end, basically.
Did you find that being able to play a role in this film helped you book other gigs?
I don't know. I think, it's a funny thing where you don't know how much it helps. I think it will definitely help. I mean, this is a film that, based on box office numbers, it has more than exceeded expectations and, has become very popular. So I think on that front, none of it can hurt. And then, the other side of it too is a lot of my scene work and everything is with Daisy Edgar-Jones, who is, obviously this phenomenal actress, but it's also great as an actor to be able to play opposite somebody of that scale, which says something probably on a bigger scale than just playing opposite of, some other random actor.
Are you happy?
I am. It was such a crazy process. And, I actually had a chance to talk to Daisy, and she said something after the premiere, which I thought was very interesting. And she was like, she's like, it's just such a grand scale because this is such a massive, massive movie for Sony. And I never really thought about it that way, where you're looking at this person and I'm like, well, she's this huge star. And she's saying she's never experienced anything of this scale. And in the back of my mind, I'm sitting there being like, oh man, like like when is it ever going to happen again type of thing? Because we just never know that I really just tried to enjoy all of it because it really, really was a blockbuster release for Sony this summer. So it was cool to experience something that large.
What is your dream role?
Ooh, you know, I have been asked this before, and I don't know if I have like this specific, like, this is exactly what I want. There's two different directions. I'll take it like superhero direction, and then I'll take it like just a generic role. Superhero direction, I would love to play Wolverine just because that would be fun.
I can see that.
Fun, and also the Logan thing would be cool too.
True.
And then just in general, I've always wanted to kind of play the bad guy, just like a bad guy, like in a large film, just for the idea that I think the mindset of, a quote unquote bad guy is very interesting. I think that when you start to kind of deep dive into the personalities and stuff, depending on who the actual character is, I don't know, it intrigues me for some reason that I would love to have the opportunity to play something along those lines.
Yeah, getting in the mindset of a bad guy and being able to look at some of the other actors that get into sort of like a method character, so to speak. I mean, I've heard some wild stories.
Oh, absolutely. It's in two, and I think just the generic idea of like, a bad guy doesn't think they're bad most of the time. That alone is very interesting, which means, their thought process to them is normal. And if you head down, that road, I think it would just be fun to play with. It really would be.
And oftentimes the ones that are playing the bad guy, they've often got a tortured past, but you don't often get to see that. That's why I love the Joker, the latest Joker film, because you actually got to see the progression of
where it
actually made him a bad guy in the first place. And a lot of it came down to trauma, like for sure. Yeah. So bad guys are these traumatized individuals that are thinking they're doing the right thing by trying to fix the world or some degree, but then you just got some bad people out there.
Well, and playing with the idea of not even being aware that your traumas affect you and how they affect you and everything too is, I mean, on a psychological level, it like I said, I just think it would be very, very fun to kind of head down that road and just see where it takes you with someone, depending on who that character is.
Yeah, man, I think so too. And to see you as, I can see you as Logan, and Wolverine is my favorite character from Marvel, essentially. And yeah, big shoes to fill, but I think you got it, man.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, it would be definitely hard to outshine the master or the last Wolverine, but it would be fun in terms of superheroes. That would be a cool one to do.
You never know, man. Throw your hat in the ring, ask away, and you never know. But
that's my thought process. I'm just going to keep saying it and just until somebody gives me a call.
That's the way, man. Like that's what I've often experienced in my own life is if my grandfather used to say again, if you don't ask, you don't get. So True. You won't ever know an answer to something if you don't ask. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask essentially. But I wanted to ask you two final questions, man, wrapping this conversation up. What do you love the most about yourself and your story?
I think there's a lot of resiliency in there. I think that looking back on kind of how this journey started, I was handed a lot initially and at a young age, and I didn't know how to handle some of those things. And I think learning from the mistakes that I made at that young age and kind of learning how to take them and go with it. And then also the resiliency factor of, some of it was kind of taken away on a certain level and things got difficult and, kind of sticking with what I started with. So I'm happy that I've been able to kind of pound away and, get to where I am based on what I've gone through.
Man, if I had more time, I'd dig a lot deeper and get more out of your story. Maybe for another time, man. But I think you've got a lot more to your story that is really, really fascinating. But this is my final question for you. It's a hypothetical one. Now, I love asking actors and filmmakers this question, especially, but I want you to imagine with me for a moment that you've been able to reach the age of 100. All your friends and your family have decided to put together a film for you of everything you've ever said and everything you've ever done. Don't ask me how in the world they got it all. We'll call it magic for the sake of argument. But they've been able to get it and show it to you on your 100th birthday. What do you want that film to say and to show about your life?
Wow. I think that one thing that means a lot to me is attempting to give back. So I think that I would like to, look back at all of it and see, kind of the effects and what I was able to do with the situation that I have been in and will be in the future. And, how I've been able to give back and affect people's lives throughout the process of it, whether it was, somebody obviously close to me or somebody that I didn't really know. I just, I think that I try to be very human and personable with people because I think it's easy not to be. So, I think looking, if I had to look back at that point in time, I think just making sure that, I influence people in a positive way and just made them happy, really.
Yeah, focusing on humility, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's good. I appreciate you. I appreciate your story. I wish I had more time, like I said before, but thank you so much for your time today, Logan, and your wisdom, your advice, and obviously your story, and for joining me today on the Storybox podcast.
Thank you very much, Jay. It was a pleasure.